On February 1, 1995, Richey Edwards checked out of the Embassy Hotel in London. He drove to his flat in Cardiff. His car was found near the Severn Bridge. He was 30 years old. He has never been found. For 2 years before that morning, he had been describing the collapse in public. In interviews, in lyrics, in the flesh of his own arm. The touring schedule continued anyway. The machine did not pause. This is not really a story about fame. It's a story about what visibility costs and what some people were willing to pay to escape it. If you've never seen this channel before, this is what we do. Every week, we look at the lives public narratives got wrong. Subscribe if that's the version you're interested in. Richey Edwards was the lyricist for Manic Street Preachers, one of the defining British bands of the 1990s. A man with a first-class degree in political history, who used song lyrics to argue about psychology, class, and the cost of being seen. He was not performing instability. He was documenting it. The band had just released the Holy Bible, their darkest and most uncompromising album. In August 1994, in front of NME journalist Steve Lamacq, who had questioned the band's sincerity, he carved the words "for real" into his own forearm. The wound required 17 stitches. 4 months later, the tour buses kept moving, the interviews stayed booked, the machine did not pause. He checked out of that hotel on a Tuesday morning and was never seen again. Richey Edwards disappeared physically. What follows is the story of musicians who disappeared another way. Artists who walked away from fame in full public view, by choice or by the system's indifference. Each disappearance was different. The thing that made them possible was the same. Mark Hollis, the voice behind Talk Talk, spent the early 1980s making records EMI could sell. Then he stopped making what the label wanted. Then he stopped making what anyone could sell. By 1988, he had steered the band towards something the industry had no framework for. Hollis wanted to make one thing. In 1991, Laughingstock was released. It sold modestly. The band dissolved. No statement, no farewell, no explanation. He gave a handful of interviews in 1998. Quiet, measured, a person already halfway gone, and then stopped entirely. Refused every subsequent request. In one of his last recorded conversations, he said, "Music is not a career. If you need to make it, you make it. If you don't need to make it, you don't." Then he went home. He lived in the English countryside. He raised his children. He walked to the shops. The people who knew him in those years described someone, not in exile, not in mourning, just living a life that had nothing to do with being watched. He died in February 2019. He was 64. The industry read his absence as loss. He appears to have experienced it as completion. Scott Walker, former teen idol turned avant-garde recluse, discovered something worse than failure. He discovered success and found it unbearable. He arrived in Britain from Ohio in 1965. Within 2 years, he was one of the most commercially visible artists in the country. The crowds, the performances, the daily requirement to be whoever the public had decided he was. By 1969, his records had moved so far from what the market wanted that the audience had largely gone. The audience disappeared. The contracts didn't. His label pressed him back. He spent most of the 1970s recording work he didn't want to make, in studios he didn't want to be in. Not artistic output, by his own account, survival, nothing more. When the contractual weight finally lifted, he made Climate of Hunter. He gave almost no interviews, when he did. He said he wanted to make things that could not be categorized. On Fame, directly. It was horrible. I was never comfortable with it. He died in March 2019, 6 weeks after Hollis. He was 76. 2 men, parallel arcs, neither planned it as a statement. Both simply stopped. When stopping became possible, then something stranger happened. Sixto Rodriguez, a Detroit songwriter almost nobody in America had heard, recorded 2 albums in 1970 and 1971. Cold fact, and coming from reality, both failed commercially. The label Sussex Records dropped him. He went back to demolition work. He raised 3 daughters in the same modest house he had always lived in. He did not disappear. He was erased, but only on one continent, in South Africa. His records had circulated via bootleg copies through the 1970s, and into the apartheid era, he had become one of the most significant musical presences in the country. Widely beloved, widely mourned, he was believed to be dead. The rumor was that he had set himself on fire on stage. He was clocking into work in Detroit. An entire country had built a mythology around a man who was still picking up a paycheck. A record store owner and a journalist tracked him down in 1997. He toured South Africa that year. To audiences of tens of thousands, he stood on stage in front of people who had grown up with his voice and grieved his death. The royalties from decades of sales had never reached him. The system that erased him had, in the interim, built an entire cultural legacy around what it threw away. He died in August 2023. He was 81. He was still living in the same house in Detroit. Every week, we look at the lives, public narratives misunderstood. Subscribe if that's the version you're interested in. After the Fugees, Lauryn Hill became one of the most famous musicians on earth. The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill sold 8 million copies. It won 5 Grammy Awards. She stood on that stage in February 1999 and was, by every visible measure, at the center of everything. She was 23 years old. By 2001, she had withdrawn almost entirely. 20,000 people waiting for songs she no longer wanted to sing. The MTV Unplugged performance that year is a primary document. 2 hours, unscripted, unedited, a person speaking in real time about what the previous 3 years had cost her. She described feeling used. She described not recognizing herself in the image the industry had built. She described the decision to stop. The press called it a breakdown. It was a testimony. The difference matters. She retreated to a religious community in New Jersey. She did not release new studio material for 15 years. In 2013, she was sentenced to 3 months in federal prison for taxes unpaid on income earned during the years she had spent outside the industry's infrastructure. Her statement to the court described, in her own words, what she had been attempting to leave and why. She returned to performing. She arrived late. She rearranged songs audiences had come to hear unchanged. This was reported, consistently, as erratic. It may equally be read as a person who had re-entered public life on her own terms and had no intention of revising them. Outsider musician Daniel Johnston recorded music on a portable cassette player in his parents' basement in West Virginia. He copied the tapes by hand. He distributed them in person. By the time Kurt Cobain wore his t-shirt to the 1992 MTV Video Music Awards, Johnston was living under his parents' care in Waller, Texas, diagnosed with bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, and not particularly interested in what the sudden visibility was offering. The 2005 documentary The Devil and Daniel Johnston would later bring his story to wider audiences. Atlantic Records signed him. He recorded 1 album. He returned to Waller. He died in September 2019. He was 58. He had never fully entered the machine. He never needed to. He made things alone, in a room, for reasons that existed entirely outside the industry's framework. The label came to him. He took what was useful and left everything else behind. Some people escaped the machine. Daniel Johnston was never really inside it. Pete Townshend of The Who wanted to leave. For decades, he described the cost. The same songs, night after night, for audiences expecting the same performance. From a man who had written those songs 50 years earlier, The Who toured in 2023. Townshend is what happens when leaving is no longer possible. The people who successfully disappeared were those without a structure large enough to pull them back. Hollis had no machine. Walker survived his, across a decade of work he never wanted. Rodriguez had never been given one. Hill walked away from hers at personal and financial cost. She documented in federal court, Johnston had built his entire life to avoid one. Townshend has the will. He does not have the exit for Richey Edwards. The exit remains unresolved. No answer, no return. A car by the bridge, and then nothing. For the others, disappearing may have been the only resolution they ever found. For some people, disappearing was the only way to remain themselves.